Hi, everybody. Welcome to Soil 2106, and this is week 1. I just wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of go over the basics of soil science. You may have had this in a previous class. This may be your first exposure, but I want to get us all on the same page here. So to kick it right off, I think we can start at a pretty easy spot, which is to ask, what is soil? Now, of course, there are always many definitions for something, and there is the super duper long technical version that I am going to spare you from. I don't find it super useful personally because it doesn't seem like a good working definition. So the one that I like that's kind of a good working definition for us to start with is that soil is the layers of generally loose mineral or organic material that are affected by physical, chemical, or biological processes at or near the planetary surface, and usually hold liquid, gases, and biota, as well as supporting plants. So I think I want to use that definition to kind of help us get down some of the basics here. So kind of first off, what is soil made of? I want to bring out a couple points in this definition. So soil is made of mineral and or organic material, and it has things like liquids, gases, and biota in it. So biota meaning living things, plants, animals, etc. So when we look at a soil, generally about 50% of that soil is made up of solids, that mineral or organic material. And the other half is empty, or is space, not necessarily empty. But of that solid portion, most of it is going to be mineral material for most soils. So about 45% of the soil is mineral, which is like broken down rocks, and about 5% of it is going to be organic material, so things that are currently living or used to be living. Of that space, it's generally split about half and half, so 25% is going to be pores, which means it's filled with air, and that air is, oxygen, CO2, N2, things like that. And then about 25% is usually filled up with liquid of some sort. So to give you a sense of what that actually looks like, I like this video from my friend Dr. Devin Ripner, who used some high-tech stuff to visualize this. Now, this short video, the yellow is the mineral portion, and the blue is your pores, your space. And this is a soil aggregate, which is a small clump of soil, and it's about 2 millimeters in diameter. So real small, it's about 1/10 of an inch. So it's a pretty small little thing here. And here's a quick video just showing you, quick video showing you what it looks like. So it does a quick little spin around, and then you see the pores go away, so you can just see the mineral piece, and it moves you through the aggregate. Now that purple stuff, that is organic matter that's kind of mixed in there. So you can see how those pores really are well connected, and they are everywhere throughout this aggregate. And here comes the mineral portion. And you can see how, again, the mineral and the organic are really, really kind of intimately mixed with one another. So all that blue shows that, soil is not really that solid, even at these very, very small scales here. So how does soil become like that, right? How is it made? So within that definition, soil is affected by physical, chemical, or biological processes. Now, what happens is that mineral piece, right, it starts to be affected by these processes. And one of those processes, it breaks it down. It breaks it into smaller pieces. And that happens over and over and over and over again to move from big rocks and boulders all the way down to tiny little particles of soil. Now, this process is called weathering. So when something is Bigger particles, generally we say that's less weathered, and smaller particles, we usually say that that's more weathered. And so that process of weathering, as you can see from the picture here, as that happens, the decrease in particle size, right? You have a bigger particle here and smaller particles here. Another thing, though, that happens is that the surface area increases, right? The amount of perimeter on these, once you have a bunch of smaller particles, is more than the perimeter that would be on these larger mineral particles. So we have names for those mineral particles based on their size. We have 3 different particle size classes. You might be familiar with some of these. So you have sand, which refers to anything that is between 0.05 and 2 millimeters. Then you have silt, which is between 0.002 and 0.05 millimeters. And the smallest is clay, which is anything that is less than 0.002 millimeters. So that's a pretty small particle here. And you can see some close-ups to see exactly what those look like. Now, just to give you a sense of scale, right, like these numbers are kind of abstract. If a clay particle was about as big as this little dot right here, a silt particle would be about yay big, whereas a sand particle is going to be much, much larger, as you can see here. Okay. So when we combine those particle sizes, we call that texture. So texture is that blend of sand, silt, and clay. It refers to that unique mixture. And to kind of think about that and visualize that, we use what's called the textural triangle, which tells us when you're on that triangle, you get a total of 12 textural classes. So the way that you read this textural triangle is this side right here refers to the amount of clay going from 0% all the way down here to 100%. This here refers to silt, again, going from 0 to 100. And here is sand, 0 to 100. Now, it's a little tricky to read this, so I just want to do a quick example for you, work through it together. So let's say we have 20% clay. So we start here, 20% on our clay axis, and we move sideways here, right? So this line here is 20% clay. And let's say that we have 45% silt. So again, here's our silt axis, 40, 50, so we're 45% right here. And we move along this line here. This is the silt line. And then we have 35% sand. So 35% on the sand axis, and it's right there. So in total, that gives us 20, 45, 35. Those add up to 100%. You can go ahead and check my math on that. And that puts us smack dab right here. And that is in the middle of the loam textural class. So loam soils generally mean that they're a pretty good mixture of all 3 of these textural classes. So right there is loam. Now, in addition to thinking about the blend of particle sizes, we have to have other ways of thinking about and classifying soils, right? In the same way that we classify organisms, right? Where we have, as you learned in your biology class, kingdom, phylum, all the way down to genus, species, right? We have all these different taxonomic levels. So in soils, we have 6 different levels. I'm only going to talk about 2 of them here. So the highest one, the highest level in the hierarchy is order, right? So in the US, we have 12 different soil orders that we have put together. Down here, so order would be like your kingdom or something like that in your biology class. Down here, we have series, which is the smallest one, and that would be the equivalent of like species or something like that. And we have 20,000 different soil series here in the US. Now, I know what you're thinking. 20,000 soil series is a lot. Like, how do we think that through? How do we make sense of 20,000 soil series? Well, 3 words for you: soil forming factors. So these are the factors that soil scientists think about when they are trying to make sense of a soil and describe where it came from and what it looks like now. So we have this acronym, CLORPT. It is not necessarily a pretty acronym, but it's been around for a little while. Actually, a scientist back in the 1940s who used to be a professor here at University of Missouri, Hans Jenny, kind of came up with that, and it's stuck around. So most soil scientists will know that acronym of CLORPT. Now, what do each of these stand for? Well, the CL stands for climate. So climate would be things like rain, temperature, evaporation, things like that are what we think of with climate. Up next is O, so that's organisms. And organisms stands for everything from tiny little soil microbes to all the plants and trees and all that kind of stuff, all the way to, badgers, rabbits, deer, all that kind of stuff. All of those organisms, that unique mixture has an effect on soils. R stands for relief. So relief talks about like a slope. So it says like the steepness of the slope, the direction it's facing, right? Is the slope north, south, east, west? That has an effect on the soil formation. And relief is a way of thinking about like these site-specific factors like that. P stands for parent material. So parent material is what we refer to as the initial kind of deposit of material when a soil starts to form. So that parent material, when there's a new deposit of parent material, we think of that as, setting, that's time 0, which that last factor here, T, stands for time. So T0 is when we get new parent material deposited and we get to start thinking about, how that soil is going to form. Now, I'm sure some of you have noticed there's this ... over here. Now, Hans Jenny, in his infinite wisdom, thought that maybe, there are other things that people are going to come up with later. And so he included this ... Now, soil scientists haven't all agreed on what that might be, but some people like to say that humans specifically they're not part of this O, right? With other organisms, human effects on soil are so unique that humans should be something else. I'm not smart enough to tell you if that's right or wrong, but that is a conversation that soil scientists are having, currently in today. So when we take those soil forming factors and we kind of mix and match them, we get different types of these soil orders, right? So when we start off, we have parent material is deposited, T0, boom, start the clock, the race has started. And the first soil order that will kind of start to form is an entisol. Now, an entisol means that it's a soil that has very little weathering occurring so far. So if you look at this picture here, you'll see that if you dig down and you look at, this is called a soil profile, similar to your face has a profile. The soil has a profile. So the face of this soil, you can see that it all looks kind of the same, whether you're at the top or at the bottom, it looks pretty similar. And that's because not much of this weathering, or what we call pedogenesis, the generation of soil characteristics, has happened. Now you can look here and you can see that entisols occur kind of all over the US. But I want to just bring to your eye here, you see along some of these rivers, so we have the Missouri River and the Mississippi River, we can see that there's a lot of entisols happening there. And the reason for that is that, these are rivers, they're always carrying new material downstream. And so there's constantly getting deposits. So we don't really have a lot of chance for pedogenesis to occur. So not a lot of weathering happening there. Now, some soils are kind of dominated, the most prominent soil forming factor is this relief or that site unique factors. So the ones that are dominated by relief or site factors are called histosols. And histosols, what happens is you get a deposit of whatever parent material it might be, and then it's, for whatever reason, it becomes waterlogged. And so then you just get organic material that's in the water, keeps accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. But since it's in the water, it doesn't get a chance to really break down. It just builds up and up over time. So histosols are waterlogged soils. They have really high organic matter content. They're almost entirely organic material. So much more than that 5%. They're more in the 30% range. So when you look here, you can see that there's histosols kind of down here in the south. We call histosols sometimes muck soils or bogs or peats or anything like that. So you can see that they mainly occur along the coasts, and also up here, right, in Minnesota, the land of 1,000 lakes, and here in these cold climates, colder climates, I should say, where you have slow organic matter decomposition and lots of water there. So that's where you generally find histosols. Now, another group of soils are dominated by climate. So these are three of the soil orders here: the gelisols, mollisols, and iridosols. Climate is really the strongest factor for them. So starting with the gelisols. Gelisols are frozen all year round. Some people call them permafrost. So as you might expect, that only happens in really, really cold climates. You can see here that most of the gelisols in the United States are occurring up in Alaska, up here. You can see here in the picture that you do have some stuff accumulated up here, organic matter just kind of sitting there, but then down here, this is all just frozen year round. So that would be a gelisol. The next one is a mollisol. So mollisols are in semi-arid climates, and they are high organic matter. We like to think of these as like prairie soils. So as you might expect, they're really well spread across much of the Midwest here, and there are a smattering of them over in the West as well. So mollisols, the typical thing that you think of with mollisols, these are really high fertility soils. And they're really high fertility because they're prairies. They have these grasses that are occurring here at the top, and grasses have really deep roots. And so over time, you get lots and lots of roots coming down here, and you get organic matter accumulation, and you see this characteristic darkening at the soil surface. That's from lots and lots of organic matter inputs over time. So that's what you would expect to see in a mollisol. Now, on the drier end of things, we have iridosols. So iridosols are, you think of those as desert soils. So not too much pedogenesis happening there because it's pretty arid. And as you would expect, we find a lot of those happening in the Western US here, the Western and Southwest. Although we have some up here in Washington in the rain shadow of the Cascades, you have some iridosols there. Now, another potential soil forming factor that can really play a huge role in deciding the soil order is that parent material. So we have two that are really dominated by that parental material deposits. So we have andesols and vertisols. So andesols are volcanic soils. So volcanic ash, as it comes out of the volcano and lands, it has all kinds of really unique and interesting properties that happen that affect how that pedogenesis happens. And so as you would expect, our andesols are found, where we have lots of volcanic activity in the US. So again, the Northwest here, right? And then there's also some in Hawaii here, as you can see, and in Alaska as well. But basically the places that we once had volcanoes, and volcano deposits, we get our andesols. Another one that's dominated by that effective parent material are vertisols. So vertisols are high clay parent materials, high clay parent materials deposited, but it's this very specific type of clay. And so these clays are clays that shrink and swell when they get wet. So what happens is as those soils get wet or dry out, as they dry out, you get these really deep cracks. And those cracks let in organic matter from the top, maybe it's grass or what have you. It falls really deep in down to the subsoil, and then it gets wet again and it swells up and those cracks are closed up, and that organic matter is deposited deep in the soil, and it's so it gets that, again, that darkening. So you can see that there are kind of vertisols in a couple different places where there are river deposits. I did just want to mention a couple years ago, you might remember that there was a bunch of flooding in Texas from a hurricane that happened. So some of that is because it was down here in Southeast Texas where there are lots of vertisols. So what happened was you got lots of rain and those soils whoop, swelled right up, they closed up, it's like cement. And so no water was getting in. And so because there's no water getting in, it just runs off over the top and you have a really high potential for flooding there. So, know your soil type. And when you have vertisols, you got some special things to think about here. So the last kind of group of soils to think about are the ones that are dominated by how old they are, or by that time factor. So the first one here is called an inceptisol. So an inceptisol is a soil that is starting to show signs of petagenesis, just a little bit, right? If entisol is like a baby soil that's recently been deposited, inceptisol would be like your teenager soil, if you will. So, you have some petagenesis happening. These are medium-aged soils, and you can see that they're pretty well spread across the US. They still have that characteristic darkening at the surface from that organic matter, but then there's also some differentiation between the topsoil and the subsoil. And so that's characteristic of an inceptisol. Now, once you move from an inceptisol, you start to get the effect of organisms and climate. Those two are kind of interlinked for these two, but you start for those to kind of have some effect on which soil order you see. So the first one is a spodosol. Spodosols are usually found in cooler climates, but definitely with these conifer forests. So what happens in a spodosol is you get lots of organic matter occurring up here, and then you get this kind of characteristic white horizon here. So what that is you have lots of water moving through it, and so the things that pigment here end up moving out of that zone and they accumulate right down here. So you get this very distinct transition from the white layer to the kind of darker layer here. And spodosols are generally kind of low nutrient soils. So the forests that are in those they tend to be a little bit smaller and not super productive, et cetera. But you find them again, usually in the cooler climates with those conifers, although we do have some unique ones down here in Florida. The next one is an alphasol. So alphasols are if you have like a deciduous forest and in a warmer climate. And so those are these warmer forest soils start to have clay accumulation in the subsoil here. They still have that, you can see that really distinct organic matter at the top, but then there's also some clay accumulation down here, and they're spread out all over the US. Now, obviously this isn't all forests currently, but this is where if we kind of left it to its own devices, these would be deciduous type forests. So now we're getting to our older soils, and up next is an ultisol. So an ultisol is a highly weathered soil, which usually means it's also acidic. So what you can see, ultisols are usually in the Southeast US, right? They have lots and lots of rain and it's hot. And so you get a lot of petagenesis happening here. but you also still, again, note you have that organic matter accumulation, but then in the subsurface, note that it's kind of red, which is a thing that you see in well-weathered soils. Now, the most weathered soils are oxasols. These are extremely weathered soils. And with those extremely weathered soils, they don't happen in the continental US. You can see that they are predominantly in Puerto Rico, in the Virgin Islands, and you can see some as well in Hawaii here. So these oxasols, they're really weathered. And so what they have left over still sticking around after all this weathering are iron and aluminum oxides. So iron oxides are really red and aluminum oxides tend to be more yellow. So you can see here that, this is kind of orangish because it's a mix of those things. Oxasols are usually also very, very acidic because they're very weathered. So as you can see, there's kind of all of these different factors come together, and they, depending on how dominant they are in your kind of story of your soil, the trajectory, the life cycle of your soil, you can see how it kind of depends on your path here. One thing I hope that you noticed when we were kind of going through these pictures is that there's like really a wide variety of colors here, right? You can have grays, you can have, this is basically a black color. You can have your reds, your oranges, there's kind of got some blues here. Obviously lots of browns. So there's lots of different colors that could potentially, occur in soils. And so soil scientists get a lot of value, a lot of information from describing the color of the soils. So when we're describing those colors, we use a combination of 3 letters and numbers. So hue, value, and chroma. So hue refers to the color, like specifically the pigmentation. So we use 0 to 10 to denote the pigment location on this color wheel. The Munsell color wheel is what it's called. And we use letters to denote the specific pigment. So here's a Munsell color wheel, which is at chroma 10, value 5 or 7. You can see here that 5R is here, and we have 5Y here. So R meaning red, Y meaning yellow. And then we have this kind of transitional, it's 5 yellow red, right? So it's in between yellow and red, equidistant. And you can see you go 5 to 10, 5 to 10, 5 to 10, etc. Chroma refers to the lightness or darkness of, of the soil. So a 0 would be a super dark soil, so we're talking black, and 10 would be light, more white. Value refers to kind of the intensity of that color. So a low value is more like towards your pastels or something like that. And a higher value is like a neon or like a Crayola color. So they're very intense colors, right? Very vibrant. So together those tell us, we use those to describe the colors of the soil. Usually as soil scientists, we'll be hanging out up here, but we have colors other places as well. And we have something in lab that you'll see, it's called the Munsell Color Book, and we have pages in there, and it looks a little bit like this. And you can see that there's little holes in there, so you can look through it and put it right over the soil. So I figured it'd be good to run through a couple examples here. And these are from Karen Vaughn, who runs this wonderful Instagram For the Love of Soil, which you should go follow if you want to get your soil nerd on. So the first example here is this kind of orangish soil. So remember a 10YR, YR meaning it's yellow and red. So it's 10YR, so it's a little bit more towards the yellow than the red. And I think when you look at this, you can see that it's more yellow than red, but you can definitely see some reds in there. Now, up next, we have a 6, which gives us a value and intensity of 6. So it's not the highest intensity, but it's also not the lowest, right? You can see that this is pretty vibrant. And then the chroma is 6. So it's kind of more light than dark, but it's towards the middle of that chroma values. Then we look at a soil like this, which is 10R, which means it's red, pretty red, right? And I think we can look there and see it. And it's a little bit darker, or sorry, the intensity is a little bit lower, right? So that's a 3. And then it's also a little bit darker, so that's a 3 as well. And I think if you look at that, you can start to see it's red, but not super intense red, and it's a little bit darker, than say something like this. But there are so many potential colors. Again, Karen put together this wonderful sampling of different soil colors. So you can see, maybe pause the video and take a look at these, and you can see, compare your understanding of hue, value, and chroma to what these look like. But you can see, again, you have everything from these reds and browns and whites and blacks and yellow. And it's really just this wonderful palette of colors that you can find. Now, these don't even cover the full gamut of colors that we can see. Again, Dr. Vaughn put together this really cool pigment color, all using soils that she and a couple friends found. Look, you can even see blues in there, really intense reds and blacks. Again, just this rainbow of colors that you can find in soils. So as a quick review, soils are a mixture of multiple things. They got a lot going on in them. So it's about 50% of it is made up of minerals and organic material. About 50% is space filled with liquid and gas. That mineral part can break down through a process called weathering. So as those minerals weather into smaller particles, which we use to describe them using sand, silt, and clay. As those get smaller and smaller, remember, you also increase your surface area. There are 5 soil forming factors. We have our wonderful acronym CLORPT, and we can take those soil forming factors and combine them in a variety of ways to form different classes of soil, which we refer to as soil orders. Now, those 12 USDA soil orders, each of them has at least one of these soil forming factors that's really dominant and plays a big hand in deciding its soil order. And each of those soil orders has a distinct feature that results from the factors. And then when we're looking at soils, soil color is an important thing to think about too. And we describe that using 3 letter number combinations: hue, value, and chroma. All right, well, thanks so much, everybody. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in class.